Thank you for joining us for our first SEL Interdisciplinary Research Center seminar for 2021. Today's lecture is the first of our four-part seminar series co-hosted with O9 Solutions. We are fortunate to have Umesh Arasu, Executive Vice President of Product Management and Product Marketing, as our speaker. Umesh has over 20 years of industry and research experience working with large Fortune companies specializing in retail, consumer goods, distribution, and manufacturing. He has a successful track record of bringing innovative enterprise applications to market in the areas of integrated business planning and business intelligence. Prior to '09, Umesh was involved in strategic and leadership roles for enterprise platform and applications companies such as MicroStrategy, Teradata, and i2 Technologies. Umesh's research interests include supply chain analytics, combinatorial optimization, data visualization, and network flow algorithms. With that introduction, I will hand the session over to Umesh.
Thank you everyone. Thanks Benoit, thanks Andy for the introduction. We are extremely excited to be part of this session. It's the first one of the year for you guys, so we have to make it good. But what I wanted to cover today is the topic, as you know, is digital transformation, art of the possible. So let me just switch over to my next slide here. And just give you a quick introduction of myself. My name is Umesh and I head the product management at O9 Solutions. I have been with the company about 9+ years now, but I do have a background in operation research and industrial manufacturing. I spent a lot of time in academia like some of you guys are doing, but exciting times. Now I'm practicing in the industry, so it's also exciting as well. Just putting the things you learn in theory into practice. Those are things that are really good for us. So with that, let me walk through the agenda today, what we plan to cover. So it'll give you a quick overview of a few of the topics that I thought might be interesting. First of all, just introduce who's O9, so you have some background on what we do, what is our history, who are our customers. Then we'll talk about the key topic here around digital transformation, right? The topic around what does it really mean? There's a lot of buzzwords out there, but executives still are not sure what does that mean for them. And then we do have some kinds of learnings that we've observed from the pandemic of last year. It's been a disruptive year, right, in terms of supply chain and business transformations. So we'll talk a bit about the learnings and maybe talk about what we are seeing in terms of companies moving their business operating models from traditional to digital. We'll touch upon that a bit. Then in terms of current states, also paint a picture of where most of the traditional companies are. What is the current state? How do they move from their siloed operations and slow planning processes to be more agile? Then I'll talk a bit about the high value capabilities and use cases, what we're seeing for digital transformation, talk about how those tie into the digital operating model and what are the key elements of that and what are the use cases that we're observing, especially in the context of COVID and some of the need for visibility and adaptability, right? And to the end, I'll talk a bit about how do we measure value, especially for planning solutions. What are our value drivers? How do we measure value potential for these customers? And maybe some customer stories as well. Depending on how much time we have, I'll try to cover as many as we can. Okay, so that's a quick summary of what we plan to cover today. Maybe let me start it off just so that it doesn't get too PowerPointish. I want to try to intersperse certain concepts through our user interface as well and our application and solutions. Okay, so maybe let me introduce that concept. What are we trying to get to and where the gaps are? So I'll take a simple example of Google, right? So today, in your experience, in consumer experience, if I need to search for anything, I can go to Google and then I search for example, let's say I want to search for seminar, and Google is able to find that answer for me, right? It comes right here. It gives me a list of suggestions, topics, and then it takes me to that specific page. Whereas the same concept, when you map it to enterprises, is extremely hard. right? There is no Google search within an enterprise context, right? When somebody wants to understand what is the status of my order, they have to go through 4 or 5 different systems to actually understand where that order is, what is the status of that, who's the supplier for that order. It's not as simple as what we've become accustomed to, right, in the consumer world. So I think what we are trying to get to is that. So I'm going to switch quickly to one of our platform screens that we have and look at what would that mean if we were to translate that into an enterprise context, right? So for example, I want to understand status of an order. So I can type in an order. Let's say I have an order 192 or let's see, order 192. So I may have a list of orders, but what we want the system to be able to quickly find out, and this is where I'll introduce the notion of an enterprise knowledge graph, where behind the scenes it has mapped out your entire knowledge graph of your enterprise. And we're trying to quickly search for information, right? So for example, as I start typing, information such as what are my top 5 SKU by, let's say, gross revenue. So you'll see as I'm starting to type, what you're observing is matches to elements within the enterprise knowledge graph, right? So it knows that SKU is an element, gross revenue outlook is a measure or a KPI that I have access to. So it's trying to build that knowledge graph, and it's able to pull that information in real time, right? What we're trying to show is, can I quickly and easily access the knowledge graph to get the information out, similar to Google, and try to present this information, right? So what we were trying to start off with order 119, 192, for example. This is one of the orders that I have concerns about or I have received an email about that I want to quickly check. So I can go and look at the order properties, what's the order from, but I can also navigate to the screen to understand the status of that order, right? The supportability of that order. And this is really where the power of the knowledge graph and enterprise digital transformation comes into play, is the notion that I can go to any order, understand whether it's fully supported or not, where are the constraints, right? So right here I'm seeing that it's unable to fulfill 443 units of that order. And then I can look at what are the root causes. Root causes is because of lead time before current and so on. So this gives you a digital representation really of the knowledge graph, and then it's able to manipulate the graph and help you understand where the issues are. And so that's really what we're talking about when we talk about digital transformation, is taking some of these concepts around being able to do Google-like queries on the enterprise data, being able to look at physical representation of your supply chain. So another example would be, let's say you have a physical representation of your supply chain. This is just a simple screen that I took from one of the images out there. But if you have an assembly line or a factory line, and how do you represent some of these elements into a digital twin of the enterprise, right? And that would be the other concept that maybe we'll touch upon towards the end, is how do I represent a supply chain network, but being able to address different levels of detail, right? So I can zoom into my supply chain digital twin to understand what does my supply chain look like, but I also want to understand how do I look at details within each of those nodes, right? So I can zoom into a plant location to understand what resources are consuming, what product lines, what are the assembly operations in terms of what are my raw materials, what are the resources being consumed. But this also allows me to then quickly navigate from here to look at more details about if I want to maintain my bill of distributions, look at my priorities of the lanes, etc. All of that is being managed through here. So this is really what we're calling the digital twin, and trying to map out really the physical supply chain to a digital representation so that it's easy for us to quickly understand where the issues are, provide visibility to the extended supply chain, right? Going all the way from your suppliers to your suppliers, and so on. So those would be concepts that I'll touch upon as we go through the presentation. But what I wanted to give you a picture is where we are heading to as part of this session. We'll try to touch upon all of these topics, is what I was, at the end, I'm hoping that you'll take away what we think about digital transformation and why it's important. and some of the key topics around digital operating models, enterprise knowledge graph, and the few things that we talked about. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a picture of where we are heading to put it in context. And then let me start going through some of these slides so that let me start my pointer here. So then I'll start to go through these topics, and then we can see how if you have any questions on those. So who's O9? I think in terms of what we are trying to be is we are new kids on the block in a way. We've been around shorter than some of the other competitors, but our value proposition is to create the digital brain of an enterprise, right? And what we're talking about digital brain is really this interconnection of integrated business planning platform for transforming these specific solution areas. So as you can see, we are focused on planning. Planning is in our DNA. It'll be around your commercial planning or revenue planning, financial planning, IBP, SNOP plans, and supply chain planning, right? So those would be the core focus areas for us in terms of the platform, what we're calling integrated business planning platform. And really at the end of it is how is it getting powered is through this enterprise knowledge graph and digital brain. Some of those is elements that I'll touch upon as we go through the various slides here. Now, in terms of customers, we do have a breadth of customers. Like I mentioned, it's a platform. And what that means is really it is configurable. It is not set in stone. So there are elements of the platform that you get as part of prepackaged solutions, but it is configurable. And that's the reason why you see a breadth of industries being represented, all the way from industrial manufacturing like Caterpillar to brand manufacturing, Nestle's and Avon, etc. We have retail accounts, some of the largest retailers, Walmart's and Starbucks, etc. on the solution. We do have telecom customers. We have oil and gas customers, and pharma, and life sciences, etc. Right? So it's a breadth, and that's where we're trying to position the power of the platform, being able to adapt to these various customer business problems. And that's really the kind of business that we are in. We love the challenge of looking at various industry problems and trying to configure their solutions. So let's take a small business case here, maybe just to give you an example of what kind of solutions we're looking at. I'll give you a quick example of Starbucks in terms of what challenges they were running into and what kind of solutions we were looking at, so that you get a feel for how we are mapping the business process or business problems into our platform itself. So the key problem that Starbucks had come to us with was really their store managers and baristas. They were spending a lot of time trying to create replenishments and manage inventory at the store, right? Most of the time they were in the back room. They were spending time trying to create those orders. What's my next order going to be? And taking care of the fires. Whereas what they really intended or their objective was that the barista should be actually building customer relationship. They should be in the front of the store. They should be interacting with customers, coming to know their customers and what they need. So it's more of customer experience, and they were inundated with doing the back ordering and some of the back end tasks. So that was really their main ask, was around how do we free up their time by trying to help them with this automated store replenishment, right? So the initiative was more around ASR, where they wanted to, but there was some complexity involved. It is not a simple store replenishment because they do have to consider shelf and store constraints. I have limited shelf space at the store. I have a lot of wastage, if you know, from looking at the bill of material and recipes that they have, where they have a lot of leftover milk and cartons and all the ingredients that go, the syrups, all of them, there was a lot of wastage. There's a lot of labor costs at DCs. For example, when I'm looking at kitchens, the sandwiches are really assembled in what they call kitchens, right? And those are not in the store. And there is labor involved to assemble those sandwiches as well. So they were looking at a bunch of these complexities in terms of solutions for them to help address both the replenishment problem, but also to consider what are my local store events that are happening, right? So the other problem that they had was, in addition to this, the replenishment, they also had the element of incorporating drivers to improve their store forecast, right? And this was a use case where they were looking to add market and local indicators. By that, what we mean is, what is my temperature? Because temperature has an impact on my local store traffic, weather and temperature. If there's severe weather events, then obviously the store traffic goes down. Or if the temperature is cold, then my category of warm beverages sale goes up compared to cold, right? So the correlation of impact of temperature, weather, and the impact on their category forecasts, as well as their store forecasts, being able to consider local events. For example, there are PTA meetings that happen near the store. There is obviously going to be an increase in my need. Or if there's a local football game, for a high school football game, there is a lot more traffic at my store, right? So those are things that is hard for systems to understand today, because most of the systems are looking at historical data, whereas some of these are leading indicators. I know that next week there is a local PTA event, because of which I might need to order some more sandwiches. So that's really the context around this. What are the challenges around creating this automation for forecasting, being able to consider a lot of these leading indicators and drivers, and taking them to the next level in terms of automation and planning. So maybe just to show you what this translates to, I'll give you an example on our platform itself. So let me just go back to our screen here. So one way for us to navigate to that session, let me continue from where we were before with this order. So for example, I have a set of stores and I just want to look at my store total forecast. So I can start typing that in here in terms of trying to search store total forecast is a metric, but I also want to, for let's say store one, and let's say Q2, and for a particular time period, right? I want to look for my quarter. In this data set, the quarter was 2019, and then by day. So what this is trying to do is it's going to look and try to match what are all the elements in the knowledge graph. I know store one is an entity, quarter is an entity, day is an entity, and total forecast, right? So based on that, it's going to try to automatically render this information for me in a chart, because it understands almost NLP-like. It understands by day, meaning that I need to render it on a chart with day as the x-axis and so on, right? Now, one of the things you can do here is to further extend this, right? I want to say, in addition, I'd like to understand temperature forecast. And so I can extend this forecast, right? So here what we're trying to do is, in addition to store forecast, I'd like to overlay my temperature profile on the forecast as well, right? So then now I'm adding another measure. So one thing you'll realize here is it is not something that's predefined in the system. A lot of the existing BI tools, you'll have to pre-create these reports and store them. And then when you need to query something ad hoc, then it's out of date, right? You don't have a report to support it. Whereas here, what we're trying to get to is change the paradigm a bit, trying to search in real time, understand what the knowledge graph has behind the scenes, trying to query that and pull out the information in real time. But also from here, navigate to those specific entities, right? So I can navigate to my ML forecast model for that particular store. I was looking at store one. And then this gives you understanding of what the model itself is. So you'll notice that in addition to just my historical drivers, in this case, we also have other causal factors, right? Like temperature, weather, you have your marketing initiatives, product reviews, etc. Those are drivers that impact what my products are going to sell, right? And so we're trying to pull those in and being able to run these ML. So these have become very easy for us to do now, being able to put in a lot of variables. And we're trying to help the store managers and the Starbucks team understand what are the driver correlations, right? So you can understand maybe seasonality is the most impactful driver for this particular store, for this particular product line, right? So we're able to create that correlation for them so they understand which drivers to pay importance to. Now, one of the things that they wanted us to do is being able to translate this information. So I'm looking at a store forecast here. And then one of the things they had challenges with was store ordering. right? Because there are usually special store orders that are not captured in the system, and they wanted to make it easy. And one of the easy ways for a platform to accomplish this is to provide various interfaces for the user, right? So think of this as the central planning team that is creating these replenishments for the store, but I'd like to get inputs from the store manager, right, as well. So let me switch that to a different UI here. I'm just going to switch to my mobile interface. So here you'll see that I'm actually looking at my phone, and I have an app, the O9 app on the phone. So think of this as a store manager workflow, where the store manager at the same store, right? I'm looking at store one, and then this is my current working view and so on. But I'm looking at, let me just filter my dates to 5/8, so I can set up a replenishment or a special order on that day, right? So as a store manager, I can quickly look at the information here. And if I wanted to create, for example, a special store order on this day, right, I can say, I need 50 units additional ordering for this particular store. And then why am I ordering that? That's really where the collaboration comes into play. So the built-in collaboration features where I can come in here and type in my comments to say there is a special store event on this particular day to support a local PTA event, right? And this could be orders for my spinach cage-free egg wraps or my cappuccinos, etc. So I need to create some of those additional orders needed as ingredients for those products, right? So based on this input that I've provided as a store manager, then immediately the central planner gets notified, right? All he needs to do is, once he gets notified, he can refresh his screen and you'll immediately see the impact of the store order that was placed by the store manager, right? So I'm seeing this 50 units that I entered on the store manager's mobile phone show up here. And then I can understand why. So I can look at the store pulse to understand what is going on. So there's a special order to support my event. And I can collaborate on this. So think of it as almost Facebook and Twitter-like collaboration, where I can respond to these comments. Is this confirmed? And this becomes an interactive and it gets archived in the system, right? So there's no more papers and emails floating around. You can do the collaboration on the system. You understand why. You could capturing the reasons behind some of these demand surges and so on. And that really is the power of the platform that we're trying to portray here, is how do we take some of these genuine use cases that customers have, challenges around store ordering, challenges around creating these automated replenishments and so on, converting them into simple business problems and trying to solve them. That's really where we pride ourselves in looking at some of these genuine use cases and solving them. Okay. So that was just a quick example of Starbucks, just one such use case. We have a number of complex use cases. Walmart's and Google has a lot of complexity in their supply chains. AB InBev has a lot of stuff going on as well. So there's a number of these use cases. If you need more information, we can probably share that with you, but each of them has complexity and different types of complexities as well. Okay. So with that, let me just switch over to finish up this topic on who we are. This is a sort of a bird's eye view of O9 Solutions. Again, we are headquartered in Dallas, Texas. That's where we started the company. But our heritage is from I2 Solutions. So if you remember I2 Technologies, if you remember Sanjeev Sidhu and so on, we had started a company back in the 80s, which was a pioneer of supply chain planning, right? And so we've continued the same heritage into O9 Solutions. Our founder is Sanjeev Sidhu and Chakri, both of whom have spent a lot of time in the industry and spent a lot of time with customers. So this was a reincarnation of I2 Technologies, but not just focused on supply planning. Here we are trying to focus on integrated business planning, which includes all of the solutions that I talked about. And then really what we wanted to differentiate ourselves on was cloud-based solutions. So it's a native cloud-based solution. It was born in the cloud. Most traditional companies have tried to adapt. They were all on-premise solutions that are trying to convert to cloud, whereas we started from scratch. So we had the advantage of building something from the cloud. and trying to bring in a lot of learnings from talking to various customers over the last 20, 30 years, and trying to bring in all of that into an in-memory big data platform where we can address some of the challenges of planning, analytics, and operations as well. Okay, so that's a quick summary. I'll just talk a bit about this in the next slide. Where we are today is talking about the leaders quadrant, which is which is really something that we are proud of. If you look at where O9 is today, it is positioned as the most visionary in the leaders quadrant, even though we've been on the market for a short time, right? Our platform is about 4 or 5 years old, and that's when we made it public and started getting customers on the platform. But based on what Gartner is seeing, we have the most visionary ideas, and we are the most disruptive and innovative in the space, trying to bring in a lot of the new ideas. And these are things that, again, a lot of things that you guys work on in academia and things like that, where we'd like to take a lot of those learnings and ideas, translate them into, adapt them to business challenges as well. Okay. So with that, let me switch over to the next section. So that was an overview of who is O9. Let me switch over to the next section here. So in this section, what I wanted to cover was what is digital transformation. There's a lot of buzzwords out there and a lot of executives who get confused. So with that, let me just open this slide. Here, it's really around these keywords that you keep hearing, right? There's artificial intelligence, digital transformation, machine learning, big data, analytics, there's digital assistance, and so on. And executives ask us that question, what does this really mean for us, right? And now that COVID has really what we've observed over the last few months is that these were things on the executive's mind in terms of digital transformation, but it has really been accelerated now from based on last year's what happened with the pandemic. That has caused an acceleration for executives to start moving the needle. Right now, they're forced to. You'll see a lot more new roles in organizations now. You have the Chief Digital Officer or Chief Digital Transformation Officer. Those are roles that we're starting to see more and more from the other traditional executives like Chief Supply Chain Officer or Chief Revenue Officer. Now we're starting to see some of these new roles, and they are really interested to understand what this means, how does it work for their company, and what can they do about it, right? So what we're trying to help them understand is this, in terms of how do they incorporate some of these through the integrated business planning process. How do they incorporate some of these into their planning process itself? Okay. So let me just talk a bit about some of the pandemic learnings, what we've observed over the last few months. Again, these are things that we have seen. It may be different for different industries, but in general, what we've seen is some of these concepts. Let me talk a bit about each of them. I think we have about 5 of these, what we've been observing. One is around demand variability, right? And this is something every one of us has observed, right? The product mix shifts, especially around essential products. So when COVID hit, a lot of people were hoarding, they're buying up on essential products, and the sales of all the other categories dropped significantly, right? Nobody would have predicted that if they don't have the right systems. Most businesses had trouble giving visibility into which essential products are going to be in demand, which are not, right? So there was no opportunity for them to plan ahead. And this is where we're trying to understand what are some of the capabilities needed for businesses to stay ahead, right? So this was one. The other one was around channel shifts, right? And this has been happening for some time, people buying online, but last year there was a dramatic shift, right? Nobody would have predicted that the shift would be that dramatic, where everything is moving online, right? Then we have this regional variability, being able to understand which regions are in lockdown, which regions are opening up, which countries are going to have lockdown, which countries are opening up. There's a lot of complexity here, especially with the fluid situation of COVID, right? As it was surging, there are new strains of the virus that's impacting, that requires additional closures, things like that, being able to incorporate some of them. And obviously there's temporary spikes we talked about. So that's really on the demand side. where we observed some of these challenges that most of the companies were facing. Then on the supply side, similarly, there is supply challenges because suppliers' factories were shut down because of COVID, or their capacity was reduced significantly. They're unable to understand which of my manufacturers or suppliers can fill in for my needs across the product lines. So there were challenges around all the way from your own resources and your own factory lines slowing down or stopping or coming back online, to visibility across your entire extended supply chain, because you don't know if my tier 2 or tier 3 suppliers have issues, then how does that translate into constraints on my supply chain, right? So those were a couple. Then the third one was where we were seeing a lot of asks around these war rooms, right? So there was a lot of war rooms being set up just to address these challenges every day, right? Every day it was a fluid situation, but being able to understand the channel shifts, what decisions, what actions to take short term, what actions to take long term, how do I bridge the silos between the demand, supply, being able to do what ifs, being able to run real time planning cycles rather than these weekly batch cycles, right? So some of those were being challenges that we observed and getting accelerated through the pandemic itself. The other couple is more around collaboration. So we did see, like we are doing right now, this is a virtual conference or a virtual seminar. We've seen a lot of virtual conferences going on. Similarly, in a lot of the companies, we saw that they had to go digital. So instead of in-person meetings for SNOPs or resource coordinations or your SNOE, etc., all of those meetings went digital, and they were doing collaboration online through Zoom meetings and WebExes, etc. So that's sort of becoming the new norm, right? So they were forced to move from PowerPoints into the online tools where I can see and share information in real time, right? What I'm seeing versus you seeing, there should be no lag between those. We like to share the same information. So those were some of the challenges on the collaboration that we've observed in terms of learnings. And then the last one is around digital operating models. Now, this has really been a trend that we've been seeing where a lot of the companies are trying to make sense of all the data that's online, right? So now you're starting to get a lot of data, but they're not set up to understand the data and use that data. So which is where what we're starting to call these digital operating models, where companies like Amazon's and Uber's and Airbnb, they have a leg up in terms of how they are set up to cater to these transformation changes and the pandemic and huge shifts in demand and supply. Right, so those were the 4 or 5. We'll use these as sort of the basis to help you understand what capabilities are needed in the platform to address some of these challenges, okay? So maybe just to put this in context, maybe I'll focus a bit on the digital operating models and what we mean by that. I'll just switch over to the next slide. Really what we're seeing is this, right? Most companies are traditional operating models, what we're calling them. So think of them as how they've grown from their DNA is being a retailer or being a brand manufacturer or being an industrial supplier. That has been the core. And then they have, over time, tried to add some software capabilities, right, to address planning and so on. But those have been piecemeal. Whereas what we're contrasting that with is some of the new age companies like Uber's and Amazon's and Google's, etc., or Airbnb's, Stitch Fix's, all of those companies where they have a software DNA, right? And they've created software platforms that is then applicable to the business that they are in. Now, there is no, given that they have the software DNA, you could always say Amazon can apply a Uber problem and solve that, or Uber can become an Amazon, right? So they're, in a way, they're interchangeable because software is driving everything, right? The Tesla, they thought of it as the car is really a software, and then they built the car around the software, right? So that gives them a lot of flexibility in terms of ease of changing their models, adding new features and capabilities in real time, so they can continuously provide updates to their models and new features. So if I want to add a self-driving feature, It's just a matter of turning on a software update, right? Rather than a whole physical redesign and I have to buy a new car. So traditional companies would have had to do that, whereas these guys are thinking different, right? And that's the mindset we're trying to bring is digital operating models are the new age, and you have to transform from traditional to digital if you want to play. So a lot of these companies like Walmart's and Nike's, etc., they have started to think along those lines. They have big IT arms that is building a lot of capabilities in software, but there are a lot of companies that are not there yet, and which is where we are saying you need platforms that can help you transition from traditional operating models to digital, and we are here to help you accelerate that transition, right? Now, one of the use cases where to understand what this really means, we took an example of Amazon, right? What is the advantage of the digital operating model so that most of us shop on Amazon, so we're familiar with what they do. But really, it's around these two key pillars, right? It's around the digital customer engagement and the digital supplier engagement, right? So customer engagement is really where they're collecting this customer knowledge, right? They understand what is the purchase intent of a customer, what the demand levers cause sensitivity to the purchase, what are the product feedback ratings. They're collecting a lot of information about the customer, but they're using it, right? So they're taking the information, they're using their own ML analytics, their demand forecasting considers some of these drivers to then allow us to shape that plan, right? So I can shape where the product should be placed on the page. I can shape my pricing plans. I can shape which one should I be promoting, cross-selling, upselling, right? So all of this is happening digitally, almost in an automated fashion, right? Once you get information and building the customer knowledge, the algorithms take over. They're able to process that and recommend how do I shape that? How do I improve the chances of sale and some of those capabilities, right? So it becomes almost a digital model here. Similarly, on the supplier side, they're collecting information about suppliers, right? What are they good at? How reliable are they? How's the quality? What capacity do they have? Who are the alternate suppliers? So a lot of the knowledge base for suppliers, and they're leveraging that to make collaboration more effective, right? How do I make sure I can commit to an order on time? How reliable are the forecasts? Do I have visibility into inventory? Because it gives you all the information on the app, right? You can understand what product, how many units are left to order, when will I get my next order in, etc. All of that information, really think of it as everything being digital, right? Whereas it's very hard for traditional companies today to even understand what their customer intent is. Right? So that in a nutshell is really what we're trying to map out is how do companies move to something like this where they can understand both the customer and supplier sides of the equation, right? So in our opinion, what we are defining digital transformation of specifically around the integrated planning and operations is really these key 4 or 5 things, right? Connecting customers, your channel partners, suppliers, planning processes, and business operations, right? So those are the 4 or 5 things that we want to tie together through this digital operating model where everything comes together. And then we use AI and digital technology to actually provide these capabilities to enterprises, right? And these 4 or 5 capabilities where we narrowed it down to is one is around seeing your risks and opportunities earlier. And this is where the market knowledge and leading indicators, the story that we were talking about for Starbucks comes into place. And then enhancing that with intelligence, right? You'd like to make sure that these are driven by knowledge. You apply ML, AI, ML to the mix to give them better decisions. Then the third one around processes, enabling better collaboration, right? So real-time collaboration, rather than having to set up these meetings and call 20 different people to understand what's going on. Collaboration live on the tool to enable your decision-making and execution processes. And then finally around automation, right? Making sure a lot of these mundane tasks are automated, and then you have these digital assistants to support you through that process. Okay? So that was really what we mean by digital transformation, but there are challenges. And what I wanted to touch upon is the current state as well, right? So today, businesses are running. It's not like they're going to stop and do this transformation. but there are challenges, and those are the challenges that we want to take to the executives to help them understand why. Because you have your S&OP meetings today, there's a gap between forecast and plan, and executives are asking the same question, right? Why is there a gap? Why were there demand surprises? Why were there supply issues? Why didn't we know earlier? Why didn't we act faster? So those are kind of questions that are continuing to be asked. And it's primarily because there are no systems in place to provide that answer, right? They have to go to 10 different systems to figure out what happened, do the root cause analysis, and come back with an answer. By then, things have changed already, right? And really, if you boil it down to what's causing some of these, is really the lay of the land, right? If you look at any traditional company, their traditional operating models, there are a number of systems, right? Again, these are necessitated because you do need your factory scheduling is a tool, you need transportation management, you need commercial planning tools, financial planning, supply chain planning. So there are a number of these tools which are siloed, right? Because they don't talk to each other. They're on separate sets of data sets. They're on separate cadences. Each of them has their own knowledge base. And eventually the planners resort to using Excel and PowerPoint. So a lot of them is not even in the system. They are in Excel. Right, so there are a lot of challenges around information sharing. Any changes that I have an impact in my factory operations, by the time it gets to my P&L impact, it's already pretty late, right? There's a lot of latency in the system. And that's primarily because decision making has moved, eventually ends up being in Excel and PowerPoint. That's really good, the go-to tool for most planners. And having such a system in place, and this is really the reality of enterprises where we're seeing. And what we've observed is around the value leakage, right? It's almost like 10 to $20 million in value that is being lost because of some of these issues that we're seeing from slow siloed operations and the spreadsheets that are all over the place, right? And if you were to look at a story of typical implementations, what we've, based on our history with what we've looked at, it boils down to this low adoption back to spreadsheets, right? And even though you spend millions of dollars implementing these ERP systems or these solutions, what we've seen is, first of all, it takes a long time, right? You take 6 to 8 months to create a BRD itself. What is a design document and requirements? And then you start implementing, and then the user sees new paradigms that they are unable to adapt. Then by the time your business has changed, right? Let's say like COVID hit, and you need to be able to make some changes in your business models. Or for example, you're switching from outsourcing to insourcing, or you're switching to contract manufacturing, things like that, where the models need to be flexible, right? And some of these models are inflexible. So what they implemented, by the time they look at re-implementing that with huge cost and time implications, the planners are back to their safe zone, right? They go back into Excel. So really, this is the story of a lot of implementations and enterprise solutions that we've been observing. Okay? Where we want to take it to is trying to bring a consumer experience to the enterprise, right? So I talked a bit about the Google-like, so I tried to map out a few things here, the Google-like experience where we looked at fingertip visibility that you can easily get through consumer systems, whereas extremely tough in planning system in enterprises, right? Similarly, collaboration, right? Real time. Today, everyone's on Twitter and Facebook and WhatsApp. Those are real time collaboration tools. Whereas in enterprises, they're stuck in silos, right? You call for meetings. There's a lot of alignment issues that happen during meetings and so on. And a lot of time is lost there. Similarly, if you're looking at visibility and prescription, so if I want to go from place A to place B, it tells me the best route to take in real time, right? If there's traffic on the route, I can use Google Maps to understand, it'll give me alternate options and so on. Similarly, there's nothing like that for enterprise tools, right? Where I can look at plan misses or get early warnings into where some of the bottlenecks may be. And then we've obviously lived through Amazon's and Netflix, the learning systems, Netflix recommendations that comes or Amazon recommendations based on the browsing pattern or browsing history that you've had. Whereas in enterprises, it's typically tribal knowledge, where a lot of the knowledge is heavily human biased. in the decision making and so on. Similarly, your demand supply match, right, in real time. For example, when you order something, order an Uber, you know exactly Uber does the whole demand supply, which drivers are nearby, what's the demand in that area, how do I quickly find the right driver or the ride for you, and being able to understand where the driver is, all of that in real time. Think of it as that experience is missing in enterprise today, right? So there's a lot of firefighting that goes on. I don't know why the demand supply is off. I can't find that in real time. I need to wait for a day or a week to understand if I were to rerun the plan, what does that look like, right? And then finally, around digital assistants, where a lot of these voice-based assistants that we have today, I can ask Alexa any question and I get an answer. Whereas in enterprises today, because they're all spreadsheets, PowerPoint driven, it's extremely hard, right? So this is trying to paint that picture really of what is happening today and where the opportunities are, right? So you can see there's a lot of opportunities here to make enterprises benefit. So even small, moving the needle a little bit really helps them significantly. Taking the experience from what we've learned from consumers, bringing that to the enterprise is really key, right? So with that, let me switch over to, I think we are at 10:20. Okay, so I'll spend maybe a few more minutes on what these high value capabilities and use cases are. So that gives you a background, right? What I've covered so far is really around what we mean by digital transformation and what is the current state reality, right? Where we want to take this. Now, what I wanted to touch upon is what are some of the key use cases and how do we think of bringing these together, right? So I'll talk a bit about the digital transformation, the key pillars that we're seeing in the market more and more. What we're observing is there are these four or five key pillars in terms of what the chief digital transformation officers are looking into, right? One is understanding the consumer. The customer engagement is becoming extremely critical. Most of them with the direct to consumer now, a lot of the companies have moved to D2C model, where they are looking to understand consumer behavior, what are the customers doing, what are their purchasing behaviors, and not just in retail context, but also B2B, right? What are my opportunities with my B2B customers and so on, right? So a lot of the data, again, what this really is translating into is now you have more and more data, contextual data about your consumers, about your customers that you need to understand and process, right? And then the other pillar is around product innovation, right? So you've seen this transition happen. Every device that you have today has some sort of sensor in it, right? So whether it's your toothbrush or your Roomba or your smartwatches, etc., they have IoT embedded, they have embedded software that is capturing a lot of information, right? And this is really where, again, it's boiling down to data, right? So you're getting a lot of data from devices and your products, and you need to understand what to do, how to use that in planning, right? And decision making. How does that help you make better decisions? How does understanding my customer help me make better decisions? Similarly, you have your automation in your supply chain, right? Your digital factories, your automated warehouses, where you're getting a lot of automated information through IoT devices and so on. Your sensors, you know when your factory is going, your products, your resource lines are going to go through maintenance. You know when your shipments are getting delayed, etc. All of that information is coming through. Now, what do we do with that information, right? One of the quotes that I read is, in the near future, the most precious commodity is going to be data, right? And that is really the crux of what we're trying to do. You're getting a lot of data now. How do you make sense of the data, and how do you plan and make better decisions with that data? And that's really what we're positioning as the digital brain. So let me just move to the next slide. What we're positioning as the digital brain, which is really the core engine of your enterprise, right? So think of the brain, that is the human brain, which is taking a lot of information and processing that knowledge, right? And the analogy I like to use is converting that data into knowledge is really the key, right? What a human brain does. For example, I may have visited 20 different restaurants over the last couple of weeks. I may not know exactly which restaurants I went to, but I would really know which ones tasted the best or the worst, right? So what it is really trying to do, without you realizing, is it's taken all of that data, all of your site visit data, converting them into knowledge. So now you remember, it's converting that into memory, right? Which are the best restaurants that I went to, or the worst restaurants. Similarly, what we're trying to position here is the notion that you're learning from, you're getting a lot of market data in terms of external drivers, your customer information, a lot of that coming into what we call market knowledge stream, converting that data into knowledge. Similarly, your demand knowledge, you have your demand drivers that are coming in, your point of sale, all the information that is coming in, what is my forecast accuracy, and so on, all of them being converted into knowledge, right? And same thing with supply side. So our positioning here is really around taking a lot of the data, converting them into knowledge, because that is what is eventually required, right? For me to be able to make better decisions, I need to know which suppliers are reliable, right? Rather than going and figuring out which supplier should I talk to, system should be able to recommend the best suppliers, right, for this problem. Or which demand drivers do I need to look at? Which region should I be looking at for upsells, or which customer should I be upselling or shaping my demand to? All of those decisions come through the digital brain. And how we are looking at it is this, right? These four pillars coming together. And the digital brain is really the core of helping you plan. And based on this, we've identified maybe what are the key 4 or 5 things where we plan to focus on. Again, based on what we saw in terms of the challenges, right? What we're observing, the 5 key challenges and areas that we feel the capabilities need to be. One is around real-time market knowledge, right? And this is extremely critical to understand what are the leading indicators of demand. How do I look at my external data, internal data, and connect the dots in my supply chain, right? And all the way from consumers to my supply side. The second piece is then taking that knowledge and how do I improve my forecasting? Now, a lot of manual forecasting that happens, or your traditional time series based forecasts, which are based on historical data, that is really backwards looking, right? What we are trying to position here is think leading indicators. So I know what's happening in the future based on these external demand drivers. I know that there is, let's say, my GDP rates, or I have a new election that just got over. But if I were looking 2 months ago, I know there's an election coming in. What is the impact of that on my forecast, right? Things like that, where you could have correlations with various events that are happening in the supply chain. Those are things you want to incorporate into your forecast. The third one is around synchronizing your planning, right? How do I synchronize my supply plans and demand plans? Being able to run these what if simulations on the fly, right? And that's the critical piece. I'd like to not just understand my change in forecast, but can my supply chain support that forecast, right? And that's why we want to be able to run these simulations, what ifs in real time, but also understand what is the impact on the cost, right? How much, even if I'm going to support the additional demand, how much is it going to cost me? What additional cost operations do I need to consider? Is it going to be profitable? So being able to consider the financial implications of your plans is extremely critical. Then the fourth one is around collaboration, right? We want to bring a real-time collaboration on the tool between suppliers and customers and the planning system, right? It's a real-time communication where you really shouldn't have to do this offline. You send Excels to your customers or suppliers and have offline meetings. They should be all on the same system itself, right? And finally, around continuous learning, right? So how does the system learn continuously? All of the actions that you're taking, you're planning, how do I improve the processes and so on, right? So that's really the crux of what we're trying to get to here in terms of continuous learning. So based on this, let me spend a minute or so how this comes together. I know this is a busy slide, so I won't spend too much time, but what I wanted to highlight was there are 5 or 6 different elements that come together to make up this platform, right? We talked a bit about data. So there's a lot of data sources that pull in data. It could be from your enterprise data sources, such as data warehouses and ERPs. You could have your market knowledge streams or supply chain knowledge stream. These are external data sources that come in.
But all of them are feeding this enterprise knowledge graph. And this is really the brains behind everything. It's trying to absorb the data. And this could be, again, big data sources where we have to store all of the data, but then convert them into these knowledge models. And those knowledge models really power the analytics, right? So you can do a lot of analytics on the knowledge models and then use them for all of your planning processes, all the way from IBP to supply chain to revenue. So there could be a breadth of planning processes, and then take that information and collaboration, right? So engage with customers. You have different types of customers, or engage with suppliers, your tier one, tier two collaboration, etc. And then also integrate with business operations, right? These are where you talk about these fringe operational folks. So the planning is almost central, but you also want to get inputs from finance, your logistic operations, or your data scientists, your account sales, who have certain actions they're taking when they're talking to customers, for example. How do I shape the demand? They expect certain inputs from the platform, right, in terms of helping them guide their decisions, but also get inputs back from these operations into the platform, right? So this sort of in a nutshell. Again, we could spend a lot more time here, but what I wanted to quickly talk about is a lot of elements that come together to create a platform like this in terms of art of the possible, because all of these are critical, right? Critical elements that need to happen for us to enable a digital transformation in enterprises. So maybe let me spend a couple minutes on the enterprise knowledge graph itself so that you guys get an idea of what we mean by the EKG. Really, this is the EKG model behind the scenes in a way, where we're trying to say there is a number of relationship types, right? You could have a hierarchical relationship between various entities, and also your network graph relationship. And what this brings together is really the two, which is trying to correlate hierarchies and networks in the same data model, right? And that helps us really create these knowledge models around your forecast knowledge models, or assortment knowledge models, or competitor intelligence, customer intelligence models, etc. The number of these models get created. But what we want to also highlight is these are not static, right? Think of it as the brain that is always evolving. As more information comes in, you'd like the brain to actually take over and extend the models and make it so that it's flexible. I shouldn't have to bring down the system to actually add a new model to the mix. It should be automatically able to extend the graph. And that's where the power of the graph comes into place for us, because we're able to easily add nodes into the graph without having to bring down the system. And these should happen automatically. What we're envisioning is, if an email comes in, for example, I have a new competitor X that has a product launch next week, right? So now let's say competitor X was never in my system. I didn't know about competitor X. I shouldn't have to go into my ERP system and add competitor X and then figure out an ETL transfer of that data into my system. Let's say the email comes in, it automatically figures out competitor X through the email tagging. And that's what I was showing you in the NLP search. There's a lot of tags that get created. Competitor X becomes a new tag, and it's related to product Y, for example. So then that association happens automatically through the knowledge graph, right? Competitor X knowledge and product Y, those get related. And I know who's the owner for product Y, right? I have a relationship to the owner as well, which is the people. So I know any email that comes in from external systems automatically gets processed. It gets associated with the product, and it sends the email to that person that's in charge, right? So that's really what we're talking about, evolving the brain rather than a static representation. New models coming in get part of the brain, and the brain evolves, right? And you're starting to make it richer and richer as it goes. Now, there are some features that I really don't want to get into at this point. It's a bit more detailed around the need to have this big data store behind the scenes that's integrated. The extensibility, real-time APIs are critical, because now you're getting real-time information. And how do you easily access that data? And we talked a bit about converting data to knowledge, so I'm just going to skip that. With that, let me just skip a couple of slides. I know we may run out of time, so I'm going to try to hit some of the highlights. We can skip the challenges and this one. What I wanted to touch upon was this one, which is some of the capability gaps and use cases that we're seeing more and more. So, and I just wanted to highlight the top 5 in each of these categories. These would be in demand planning, S&OP, IBP, and supply planning. Right. So in demand planning, the ones that we typically run into and where we see a lot of issues is leading indicators, which we talked about, right? Really, you see a lot of surprises today in business plans and demand plans because they did not consider the fact that there was a competitive product launch, let's say 2 weeks down the road, or there is a severe weather event that's going to happen in New York next week, right? Things like that, where it's drivers that might impact your demand not being considered. That's a big challenge that we see today. Similarly, visibility into your initiatives that you have. So I have my own product launches or I have my own marketing, let's say Super Bowl advertising event. So this year, a lot of companies have dropped that from there. So Pepsi is not going to advertise or Coke is not going to advertise. And those are things that need to be considered because my forecast for that same period is going to be different, right? What I used to get the uplift from marketing, some of these marketing events is not going to be part of the mix. So then because they have different systems, it's a big challenge for them today. Similarly, in B2B, we see a lot of challenges incorporating your opportunity pipeline into your forecast, right? And so on. So those would be the 4 or 5 top things that we see around stat forecasting. A lot of them not able to use AI ML techniques and so on, right? In S&OP, I'd say maybe the key one is around conducting meetings in PowerPoints. And this is really a big productivity drain, right? By the time companies spend the time to create these PowerPoints for an S&OP meeting, and they do it monthly, so it's a monthly meeting, but they spend a week actually collating the PowerPoint itself. And there's a lot of people there trying to create that. And by the time they get to their monthly meeting, the data has changed, right? But they can't go back and edit the PowerPoints because they've taken snapshots and images and so on. These are 100-slide decks that they create, and it's very hard for them to update them, right? So that's one of the biggest challenges we see in S&OP to make it, it's very hard for them to react to situations in real time. And then most of the report, it's mostly reporting based, and they're not able to do gap closure actions, right? So if I say I have a new opportunity for a new order at customer X, there's no way for me to say that can I support that order or not, right? Or if I need to close the gap to my plan, what are the initiatives to close that gap? Being able to do some of those what ifs is really where the challenges are. Similarly, on the supply side, a lot of visibility. I think what I've shown you in the EKG is really mapping an extended enterprise, right? So it's not just within my enterprise, but being able to look at tier 1 suppliers or tier 2 suppliers, understanding where their factory locations are and where the gaps are going to be in terms of supply issues or supply constraints, identifying some of those. So those would be some of the 4 or 5 top use cases that we see typically in enterprises. Right, so let me touch upon 1 or 2 of these, one of each to give you a flavor for what we mean by some of these use cases and how it translates into our tool as well. So one would be demand planning opportunity, which is really reacting where we're seeing maybe in terms of maturity journey, most of the customers are in this phase, right? Where they're looking at orders, which could be orders or shipments. They're looking at that. Again, it's all historical data. They look at order shipments and try to project what my forecast is going to be. What we've seen the next level is some customers are sophisticated enough where they're moving from these sell-in, what we call sell-in as the shipments and orders, to sell-out based models where they're looking at maybe customer sell-outs, right? So the point of sale at the store, there are a lot of stores that provide point of sale data, channel inventory, and so on. And moving that to the driver-based models where you're able to collect a lot of these external drivers, right? And these are, again, areas that there's a maturity involved because a lot of folks don't know how to collect the data and what to do with the data. And that's why we're trying to provide some capabilities of doing both of these, right? So let me just show you an example. Let me switch here. So I'm going to switch to one of the knowledge hubs that we have, where we're collecting a lot of the information. Again, a lot of this is public information, but we're able to collect the information from, for example, Google Mobility. So it gives you these trends information to help you understand, I know that during March, April of last year, people were not going to grocery stores. So you'll see the trend really reflecting that most people were in residences, which is why this is higher compared to all of the other locations, right? So a lot of this data is available publicly and it's available for us. So we've been collecting this information through various websites, your demographic trends, your which cities have what kind of trends in terms of number of elders, number of dependents, and so on, or events, right? So the events in terms of holiday events that might impact my sales, being able to collect this information, sporting events, etc. But so what I'm trying to show here is just a collection, data collection for the market knowledge, right? So we're able to pull in this information, but how does this get used? Maybe let me show you a quick example here, what we're talking about, the AI ML and black boxing the outputs. Right, so this is an example of a forecast that we see, historical forecast. It's going to be extremely hard for us to predict what the forecast is going to be for this. But if you were to break it down further, right, so we can start looking at what are the correlations. Does temperature have an impact, right? So you can overlay temperature trends for the same location, for example, in Walmart for that region. You'll see the correlation is pretty low. I see the peaks are different from what I'm seeing here. So then you can take that out and say, what if it was number of days on promotion? Yes, which has an extremely high correlation. Right? Every time there's a promotion, there is a peak. So I can understand that. But then it still doesn't explain why this peak is so much higher than this peak, right? So then I can start looking at specific types of promotion events in terms of vehicles, whether it's a shipper or an aisle promotion or shelf on the shelf, etc. So you can start overlaying this. This is sort of, instead of having it as a black box, the planners actually have the ability to overlay so they understand exactly what event caused some of these spikes. But still, it doesn't explain really why the big spike happened, right? So what we can then do is look at some of the other drivers. One other example would be, is it a weekend or is it a holiday? So holidays does seem to have an impact. You'll notice that New Year's and Christmas has some correlation to the bigger spikes, but it still doesn't explain the actual spike itself. And that one is actually related to pricing, right? So if you look at the the price driver, you'll notice that, not the price, I mean the discount. So if you look at discount, it actually correlates pretty well. So there's one time when they had a 74-cent discount on the product versus their standard discount is 49 cents. So either it was a one-time promotion which caused it. But just to give you an idea, really what we're trying to say is taking in a lot of the information of the market drivers, leading indicators, correlating that with your forecast, and then looking at the ML drivers, right? It tells you that promo discount is really the highest importance in this segment, which is what you need to focus on, right? So anytime there's a small discount change, there's a big impact on your sales. So that would be an example of how we think about bringing in some of these external drivers into the mix and then trying to influence what the forecast needs to look like. And then we talked a bit about on the demand supply side, how do we look at representing the digital twin and trying to take all of the information in terms of inputs, collaboration, your process capabilities, and trying to create these optimized plans in terms of supply chain, financial outlooks for the plans, etc. So that would be the other one. And then in SNOP, what we're thinking, like I mentioned, moving to these online meetings, right? So from these static PowerPoints where you're hard to get information, now using NLP and digital meetings. An example of this would be, let me just go here. So in our platform, what we're thinking is online meetings where I can create new presentations and assemble what a meeting needs to look like, right? So I can go into a meeting, I can actually add commentary to the meetings and run these meetings in real time and also collaborate during the meetings itself, right? So I can create my SNOP meeting decks here online and then use this to actually collaborate, review the meetings, have feedback from various roles that are part of the meetings and so on. So that would be an example of what we're saying in terms of SNOP, moving from static PowerPoint to live on the system. Then the other art of the possible that we are thinking about is really taking from SNOP to true IBP, right? So far, we do SNOP meetings are mostly around post game, right? So they do a little bit of post game to understand what happened. And we look at it as the three W's, right? What happened, what is likely to happen, and what actions to take. And in what happens, you need a lot of post game analysis and root causing. What's likely to happen is where you bring in your analytics to do predictive analytics, your automated forecasting, and then your scenario planning capabilities into what prescriptive actions to take, right? And this is where the gap closure workflows are extremely critical, because when you have a demand upside, for example, how do I convert that into a supply response, right? And those are things that we want to incorporate in the tool itself, right? So for example, here, let me just show you an example of if I were to submit a forecast, then how do I make sure if there's a demand upside, then what supply side scenarios to evaluate, right? And what objective functions to maximize. So then there's some automation to it. It automatically runs these scenarios and comes back with the best response scenario as well. So trying to pull in some of these in terms of an art of the possible is what we're looking at. With that, let me just skip through. So there's some more details on some of the observed challenges that we see. We've covered a few of these, but I'll skip that. Same thing on the supply planning side, on the SNOP side as well. And then users are important because there are different types of users. I think what we wanted to talk about are executives, your planners and analysts, operations, IT innovation teams, and so on. And each of them has a need. And what we're trying to connect is bring them all together rather than them having their own applications. All of them need to be interfacing with the planning systems to provide their feedback as well. So with that, I know we're up on 15 minutes. I'd like to leave some time for Q&A. But let me, in the meantime, just quickly touch upon these value potential and talk about the framework that we have. How do we derive value from some of these applications, right, and implementations? Typically, what we see is in terms of the value buckets of how value is spread in planning and integrated planning and operations is mainly around COGS reduction, right? So we have these four categories: reduction in COGS, reduction in inventory, improvement in productivity, and improvement in sales, right? So those are the four buckets that we typically see. And within them, we've broken it down further. So there's improvement, reduction in your manufacturing costs itself, base transportation or logistics costs, reduction in expediting and flex costs, obsolescence, material costs, etc. So those are really the buckets in terms of how we look at value. And typically what we've seen is for $1 billion company, it's about $10 to $20 million in value that we can save through implementing better digital transformation and better implementation of IBP systems, right? And the details behind this is here, which is really breaking it down in terms of if I were to look at transportation costs, then how does it help improve, right? Through early visibility to constraints. So you're actually looking ahead and reducing your peaks in peak periods and trying to optimize the flow. And a great example here is Walmart, right? What we had to do there was sort of smoothen their flow because they were having a lot of situations where you have orders for Halloween or orders for Christmas coming during Halloween time periods, right? And so their entire network was bottlenecked, and trying to at least smooth that out, understand when the orders need to flow in and smoothing it out. Those are some of the capabilities of the digital twin and the supply planning that we do. But these are details behind what are the elements and drivers that we look at, and how do we at O9 convert this into value buckets so that as we go to these customer engagements, we're able to create, if we focus on increasing sales, then what are the key drivers to help the businesses, right? So with that, I know we are up on time for Q&A. So let me skip through. We've talked about a couple of customer cases, but there are some other cases as well here, which we can cover it, or you guys can read the deck if needed. But there are some examples on our website as well for you to go through and understand what the challenges were, what was the project timelines, what were the key value drivers, and why O9 was selected for some of these implementations. And we do have some benefits as well in terms of, again, trying to give you a breadth of these various solutions across industrial manufacturing, this is steel manufacturing, tire manufacturing, etc. And I would like to then maybe call it a wrap here. I'll end with a couple of slides here, just to get you guys present and get involved, right? So we have what we call the AIM 10X network, an innovators network, which is really AIM. By AIM, we mean AI-powered management systems for 10X improvements in planning and decision making. And this has a collection of folks that are part of it. So it'll be good if you want to mix with industry peers or mix with like-minded folks. Then this is a great place for you to start to network with some of the best people, talk to people if you want mentorship opportunities or if you want to discuss with like-minded folks. And just to give you an example of some of the folks, you'll be talking to folks that are former execs at P&G, Avon, Kraft Heinz, etc. So we have a number of people that are part of the network now. And if you are interested, you can go to our website. We have the AIM 10X Innovators Network. You can look it up on LinkedIn as well and look at joining that. Okay. So with that, let me go to the last slide where we can open it up for Q&A and maybe use it to wrap up the discussions as well. Okay.
Good. This is Benoit. I'd like to thank very much Umesh for this very thorough presentation on the art of possible, mostly from a supply chain, integrated business planning perspective. Now, one of the reasons for having Umesh and O9 come here to present is to highlight how disruptive new style companies like O9 are bringing new innovations to the ecosystem that can have a very deep influence on the capabilities of many players in industry, and also to see how such companies evolve and are growing a portfolio of offers and capabilities. So at this stage, what I'd like is to entertain, if we have any questions or comments from the audience, we'll get there. So we have a question from Shubham Mishra. That says, can you please provide a real-time use case of collaboration between Tier 2, Tier 1 production facility and distribution in the manufacturing space? So obviously this would take a lot of time, but if you could, like in 1 or 2 minutes, just give the spirit of that, how this is done, that would be appreciated.
I can do that. So let me actually show it on the tool itself, so it'll give you a better flavor for what we're talking about. So typically when we say extended network, right? So I showed you the knowledge graph, right? Where we presented, where is our knowledge graph here? So when we talk about the knowledge graph itself, you can go all the way from what I showed you, the suppliers to the suppliers. So you can model not just your plant locations, but your suppliers' plant locations, and this can be extended, right? So I have suppliers, I can have my Tier 1, Tier 2 manufacturing. Again, you could have a deeper network. But what we want to do is also pull the collaboration within the tool itself. So I may have contract manufacturing collaboration, where if I have suppliers, where I can share with them in real time, right? I'm showing them what is my production needs, and then I can get feedback from them where they can come in, input their comments around can it be supported or not, pull them together. Similarly, if I have supplier collaboration, where I go to Tier 1 or Tier 2 supplier, where I'm sharing with them what is my procurement forecast and what are their supplier commits, collaborate on the supplier commits in the tool. So they are actually able to log into the tool to actually provide their capacity and give us an information about is it supportable or not, or do they have capacity restrictions. Based on that, we can run a constraint plan, right? And then we can figure out what is the information that they have provided and use that information to actually help us guide the decision-making process, right? So rather than having unconstrained plans all the time, we are actually working, Tier 1, Tier 2 suppliers can log into the same system to actually provide their capacity or their issues that they're having, and use that to actually collaborate on the orders. If there's any constraints in their specific plant locations, then use that information to input it in the tool and reflect that in their commits, and use that to replan the supply itself.
Umesh, I have a few questions that are related to essentially the kind of time frame and engagement related to the kinds of solutions your innovations bring to the market. So, how much right now of the companies, the clients that you guys are dealing with, are using your system more like to solve a problem, and your staff is mostly driving it, versus them taking ownership of the system and making it their own? And related to this is, what kind of timetable are we talking about from starting to think about this and having the kinds of capabilities you've been displaying through the presentation?
I think we run into these various companies at different levels of maturity. There are cases where we've gone in and phase one, for example, if you do these incremental, and one of the pieces that I skipped over was, how do we move these projects to incremental value, right? And that was the slide. Let me just switch back here, which is this one. How should enterprise approach the transformation from siloed to digital brain? And this is where I think the fast and iterative, so a lot of us are working in the agile model now, where instead of these multi-year projects, what we're doing is just incremental capability. What are the quick hitters in terms of white spaces, where we can quickly prototype and start deploying those, right? And what we've seen at various customers is just taking that approach starts showing them the value of these solutions. For example, let me see if I have some numbers here. Wilbur Ellis, for example, it took them about 10 weeks to go live into production for demand planning, right? And so what we're trying to see is these short projects rather than year-long projects, where they're looking at small incremental solutions, and that helps them really get familiarity and build the trust with the systems. For example, Tata Steel was within 5 months they were live, right, on the system itself for supply planning. So that'll give you an idea of not long projects, but short projects that are very agile, where we're working with the customers to actually build the solution and present some of these reference models that have out-of-the-box capabilities, but being able to extend it. And that's the piece where we try to come in with the initial implementation. We do the initial pass, but the intent is that it's a self-service platform. And I haven't shown you the self-service capabilities, but we end up training the IT teams and their project teams, so then they can start continuing to configure and extend the platform on their own once they're familiar with how to do that. So we don't need to be involved anymore. It becomes more of a self-service for them once they're live.
Umesh, what I'll do now is kind of a blitz series of questions, okay? You answer like in 30 seconds so that we can wrap up this with just a twist at the end. You talked about simulation. What kind of simulation are you guys really doing in this? Is this discrete event? Is this like sensitivity analysis? What kind of simulations are you currently doing?
You can run your own experiment, design of experiments, where you can set up simulations in terms of various input parameters are different, or my demand is different. Run various scenarios to come up with the recommendations. So it's a combination, I would say, of manual user inputs with discrete events and design of experiments. And there's automation as well. I can run certain scenarios automatically in the back end every time I want to run the scenarios.
Okay, now what is your perception about deterministic heuristics or decision making versus more stochastic approach that will embed stochasticity into the heuristics or decision process?
We have been somewhat deterministic in the sense that it is a heuristic for sure. We do have alternate optimization plugins as well, where the framework allows us to put in LP solvers and so on, but those become extremely slow and hard to explain. So our solver is mostly heuristic, but it is deterministic in the sense most of the demand that comes in from customers is deterministic. But what we're moving towards is more of a stochastic. The demand should not be determined. Again, that is something that we're working towards to convince the customers, and there's a maturity journey there. But we would like to move in that direction in terms of stochasticity of the demand.
Okay, now in terms of pushing innovation even further, have you guys already explored integrating into your overall technology and capabilities, leveraging virtual reality?
That one we haven't we are looking at partners in that respect. We're starting to work with Microsoft on some of their the Surface glasses and so on, where they have some of these prototypes already in place, and we are trying to come up with maybe joint collaboration opportunities where some of these digital collaboration that we're trying to do in the platform can be easily integrated with VR tools, and they're able to leverage both of them coexisting because we are cloud based. We are in Azure, we are in Google Cloud, so we have some capabilities where we are collaborating with Microsoft on, and hopefully in the near term, if there's a good use case, then we will try to integrate.
Okay, good. So, but two nice things about this is that once you're still, even though you've already achieved great innovation threads here, essentially you're still open to more, and also that you're thinking collaborative ways to make this happen, knowing that each company has boundaries there. And I like through the process how much you interact with users, with your clients to shape what your technology is all about. So on this, we have to close this nice meeting. I appreciate very much your openness and the thoroughness with which you've presented and then answered questions. You have his coordinates, okay? Umesh Arasu, sorry, from O9 Solutions. He's Executive Vice President for Product Management at O9. And please go with me in thanking him, and feel free to connect with him afterward. As you see, we'll have a few more seminars that are interacting with O9 this semester, and hopefully you'll be able to make it for these as they are pertinent to you. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Thank you especially to Umesh for this great job. And we'll see you for next seminars, the next one on February 24th. Take care. Bye-bye.